My brother invited us over and assured us that we wouldn't need to worry about rent or utilities. Maya, I work in the finance sector. My husband, who I'll call Charlie, is a car mechanic. We live in my childhood home. By childhood home, I don't mean that my parents still live there. In fact, our family home has always been more than just a residence. It was the heart of my family's long-standing business. My father, a self-made businessman, had built the company from the ground up and had served as its CEO for decades. I have an older brother who was always meant to take over the company. To prepare for this responsibility, he majored in economics in college, later earning a spot at Oxford University to further his education in business management. After years of studying and working alongside my father, he seamlessly stepped into the role of CEO when my parents decided to retire. My parents, having worked tirelessly for years, wanted to enjoy their golden years in peace. They moved to a picturesque retreat in Aspen, Colorado, where they embraced a slow-paced lifestyle surrounded by nature. As part of their transition into retirement, my brother inherited the family business, while I was entrusted with our family home. It was a generous gift, one I deeply appreciated. My husband and I moved in, eager to build a life together. The house itself was ideal. It was situated in a prime location, just a 5-minute walk from the nearest train station. Everything we could possibly need, shopping centers, hospitals, and schools, was conveniently close by. It was the perfect place to settle down and, hopefully, raise a family. I felt truly fortunate. Everything seemed to be falling into place until, suddenly, our peaceful life was upended by an incident we never saw coming. Shortly after we moved in, my mother-in-law began visiting more frequently than ever before. Even before we got married, she had been particularly interested in my family's financial standing, often asking prying questions that made me uncomfortable. Once she learned that my parents owned a successful business, her curiosity turned into something more unsettling. "Hey, Maya," she would ask with an eager glint in her eyes, "how many assets do your parents have? When they pass away, how much will you inherit?" Her lack of tact was shocking. Time and time again, she brought up the subject of inheritance, her words laced with an eagerness that made my skin crawl. I didn't want to be outright rude, so I always brushed off her questions with vague answers. I wonder how much," I would say, forcing a light-hearted chuckle. "I've never really thought about it, so I don't know. I've already received the house, so I might not get any money." But my mother-in-law wasn't convinced. "That can't be true," she insisted. "Your parents are already over 60. Anything could happen at their age. They must have talked to you about their estate planning." The way she fixated on my parents' assets made my stomach turn. At that moment, I knew without a doubt, she was counting on their wealth. I had a solid understanding of my inheritance, but I saw no reason to share that information with my mother-in-law. In fact, I decided it was best to keep it from her and even from my husband, who was quite close to her. Little did I know, a far more shocking betrayal awaited me. One morning, without any prior notice, my mother-in-law and my brother-in-law's family arrived at our doorstep, alongside a moving truck. It was around 8 a.m., on a weekend when the doorbell rang. Still groggy, I opened the door, expecting to see a delivery or a neighbor. Instead, I was met with the sight of several movers unloading furniture and boxes. Why are there movers here?" I muttered, utterly confused. Before I could process what was happening, my mother-in-law, my brother-in-law, and his wife appeared, beaming as if they had just arrived for a vacation. "We're going to be living here from today," my mother-in-law announced cheerfully, "so please take care of us." A chill ran down my spine. Before I could even respond, my husband shuffled into the hallway, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. I turned to him in disbelief. "Charlie," I said sharply, "what's going on?" His expression remained nonchalant, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "What's the problem?" he asked. "Mom and the others needed a place to stay. The house is big enough, we can spare some rooms." I was speechless. Then, as if that wasn't shocking enough, my sister-in-law chimed in with something even more outrageous. "We were invited by your brother, Maya," she said with a smug smile. "Since he called us, we're not going to be paying rent or utilities, so, we're counting on you." I felt dizzy. This was my home, the house my parents had entrusted to me, yet here they were, claiming rooms as if they had every right to be there. My brother-in-law even had the audacity to stroll through the house, peeking into rooms and commenting on which ones suited him best. This room has good sunlight, he declared. Charlie, move all the stuff out into the hallway. That was it. Enough was enough. This is my house, I snapped, my voice shaking with anger. Why are you acting like you own the place? I want everyone out, now. But instead of backing down, my mother-in-law's face twisted in fury. How dare you talk to us like that? You're the one who should get out, she shrieked. Then, smack. A sharp, burning pain exploded across my cheek. For a moment, I was too stunned to react. My mother-in-law had just slapped me. The shock of it was overwhelming, but as the stinging sensation settled in, something inside me snapped. I couldn't live like this, I wouldn't. Without another word, I packed a bag and left the house. I rented a temporary apartment and called my parents. The moment I told them what had happened, I could feel their fury through the phone. My father, normally calm and composed, was livid. A few days later, I took action. I had the utilities, electricity, water, everything, cut off. The house was fully electric, meaning without power, nothing worked, and with the sweltering heat, my husband and his family were left in misery. My phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages from Charlie. I finally picked up. Hey, what's going on? There's no electricity or water. You cut them off, didn't you? He yelled. The house is mine, I replied coldly. I'm not paying utilities for people who forced their way in. His anger meant nothing to me anymore, neither did the desperate calls from his mother, brother, or sister-in-law. Instead, I consulted my father's company lawyer. A legal notice was sent to them for trespassing. And as for my husband, when he exploded in anger, I felt nothing. I had made my decision. They had tried to take everything from me. But they forgot one thing. The house is mine. I will take legal action. You better think hard before you act. My husband's voice was shrill with rage over the phone, but I barely listened. His threats meant nothing to me anymore. With a sigh of exhaustion, I simply hung up. This is a waste of time, and I've already spoken to my lawyer about the divorce, I muttered to myself, reaffirming my decision. When I arrived home, I saw several missed calls from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. I didn't even need to listen to their voicemails to know what they were about. They weren't calling out of concern for me. They wanted to negotiate, to smooth things over, to get me to compromise, but I was done being reasonable with them. Without hesitation, I blocked their numbers. There was nothing left to discuss. After that, my husband's family, who had always carried themselves with an air of superiority, finally cracked under the fear of legal repercussions. The mere thought of a lawsuit sent them scrambling to pack their belongings and vacate my house. My lawyer handled the rest, and the divorce negotiations proceeded without a hitch. Once they were out of my life, I immediately hired a professional cleaning service to wipe away any trace of their presence. Only after that did my home feel like mine again. For the next few months, I found solace in my new reality. Living apart from my husband's overbearing family was like finally taking a deep breath after being trapped in a suffocating room for years. I had temporarily moved into a monthly rental during the legal proceedings, and while it was comfortable, nothing compared to the relief of being back in my own house. There were a few areas in need of repair, and I decided it was time to consider renovations. My father, ever supportive, introduced me to a reputable contractor, and I soon became engrossed in planning for the future, my future. Life alone was blissful. For the first time in years, I was free. No one was dictating how I should live, what I should do, or how I should behave. I could stretch out on the sofa without hearing disapproving comments. I could eat whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, without being criticized for my choices. Every quiet moment, every peaceful evening reaffirmed that I had made the right decision. Then, one evening, out of nowhere, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. I ignored it at first, assuming it was a spam call, but then, the same number called again, and again. Annoyed, I finally answered, thinking it might be the contractor trying to reach me. The moment I heard the voice on the other end, my stomach turned. Maya, please, don't hang up, just listen to me. I need you to hear me out. It was my ex-husband. 3 months had passed since our divorce was finalized, and we had made a legally binding agreement to never contact each other again. Yet, here he was, breaking that promise. Even more baffling, he had gone so far as to change his phone number just to get through to me. I took a deep breath and kept my voice steady. We agreed, through our lawyers, that we wouldn't contact each other. There's nothing left for us to discuss. Please don't call me again. I was about to hang up when he frantically interjected, his voice cracking with desperation. Wait, please, just give me a moment, I'm begging you. Against my better judgment, I hesitated. That's when he launched into his sob story. His company was in financial crisis, and his salary had been slashed. His mother's health had declined, preventing her from working. His sister and her husband were struggling, her husband still without a steady job, her earnings from multiple part-time gigs barely covering the debts they had racked up. The entire family was on the verge of financial collapse, and with his reduced salary, my ex-husband was barely keeping them afloat. As he spoke, I felt nothing but indifference. Okay, and? These were the same people who had trampled all over me, treated me like an outsider in my own home, and tried to erase my presence from my own life. Now they expected sympathy. Even if you tell me all of this, it changes nothing, I said coldly. They're your family, deal with it yourself, it's not my problem. Panic seeped into his voice. Please, don't say that, we're in serious trouble, we won't even have enough to pay the rent next month, and we might not even have food tomorrow. Maya, we were a family once, weren't we? Please, help us. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. A family? Where was that sense of family when I was being insulted and mistreated? When his mother humiliated me in public? When his sister and her husband mocked me for not being trendy enough, for not being good enough? Where was his concern when his mother forced strange herbal remedies on me, claiming I was barren and gossiping about my supposed infertility to the neighbors? My husband had once been a kind man, or so I had believed, but after we married, he became nothing more than his mother's puppet. The first time she stormed into our home unannounced, I had been out running errands. That simple act had been enough to set her off. I wanted to see Maya, but she wasn't there. I want to be friends with her, but she's avoiding me, she had wailed to him. Instead of defending me, instead of even asking for my side of the story, he had yelled at me for being inconsiderate. From that moment on, things only got worse. She insulted my cooking, claimed I was starving her precious son, criticized my every move. His sister and her husband laughed at my expense. They ridiculed my appearance, called me outdated, and my ex-husband, he stood by, complicit in their cruelty. I had nothing left for them, no love, no sympathy, no mercy. I can't help you, don't call me again, goodbye. And with that, I hung up and blocked his number. I knew him well enough to expect another desperate attempt, so I made plans to change my number over the weekend, but before I could, he and his family made their most outrageous move yet. At 11 p.m., that Friday, my door was rattling under the force of fists pounding against it. Shouts echoed through the night. Open up, let us in, we're family, you have to help us. Their voices were shrill, hysterical. I looked through the peephole and saw them standing there, my ex-husband, his mother, his sister, and her husband, all with wild, desperate expressions. You're disturbing the neighbors, leave before I call the police, I warned through the intercom. They didn't care, the banging continued, their demands growing louder. But then, suddenly, the wail of sirens filled the air. I hadn't called the police, someone else had. As the squad cars pulled up, my ex-husband and his family scrambled to flee, but it was too late, the neighbors had already gathered. A crowd watched as the four of them were escorted away by the authorities. The next day, news of the incident spread like wildfire, including to my ex-husband's workplace. By the end of the week, he was fired, without an income, his family collapsed under their financial burdens, their shared living arrangement fell apart. Now, my ex-husband and his mother live in public housing, scraping by on part-time jobs. And me? I am free,